Welcome along to another one of our Angling for You lockdown videos. This is the first of two videos that I'm going to be doing that focuses on pike fishing. In this first one I'm mainly going to be focusing on the terminal tackle that we use, and I'm actually going to talk you through how to tie up a wire trace using crimps and crimp pliers. There's a few people that's fairly new on the group to pike fishing and I've asked for some tips and advice, so hopefully there might be a few things in here that you can pick up along the way. As always, we don't profess to be experts. I'm fairly new to pike fishing myself, only been at it for probably 2 or 3 seasons now, but there's quite a few things that I've picked up along the way, so hopefully I can share some of that with you guys. And as always, if anybody's got any questions, feel free to message us on the page or message us direct, and we'll always try and help out and answer any queries that you've got. I'm going to change the camera angle now just so that it can focus on the actual tying up of a rig, and hopefully you'll be able to see as I talk you through how I go about setting up a wire. So we've adjusted the camera so hopefully you'll be able to see in a little bit more detail just exactly what it is that we're running through here. I'll show you this in a little bit more detail in a second, but essentially what we've got here is the equipment that we're going to need to be able to tie up a wire trace. So we've got some crimp pliers, a pair of treble hooks, a sleeve, a rig tube, swivel, 2 crimps, and then some wire trace itself. So just in terms of the crimp pliers that I'm using, these are Savage Gear pliers. I'll just open them up and show you so that you can actually see in the camera there. Hopefully that'll focus in a little. You can see inside the jaws there's some grooves, and that's what's actually nipping onto the crimp sleeve and ensuring that it's fixed firmly in place on your rig, and essentially what's tying it on. Pair of treble hooks you're going to need. These are Drennan Super Strong semi-barbed size 6 hooks. Generally speaking, I use either a size 6 or a size 8 for most of my fishing, depending on the size of bait. I tend to use size 8s more often than 6s, to be fair, but I never really go any bigger than a size 6. And then just here are the smaller bits of terminal tackle. So it's just a standard rig tube. That's like an anti-tangle sleeve that I use for the end where the swivel goes. That's a rig sleeve, so that just goes over the second treble that's halfway up the trace. Those treble sleeves are greys ones. You can get them in different colours. There's some red ones. I don't know why, but I just prefer to use the black ones. A couple of crimps. So you're going to need 2, one for on the first treble and then one to secure the swivel, and then just a standard swivel as well. So we need to take off some wire trace. I like to fish probably 2 to 3 foot of wire trace. Some people might go shorter, some people might go longer, but I've found that it's just what works for me best. Gives you the right amount of protection. So I've just pulled some off the spool there, and I'm just going to snip through. These crimp pliers at the end, they do also have some wire snips which are really handy, so they do both parts of the job for us. So hopefully you can see the wire trace there. It is really fine stuff, this 7 strand trace. So what we need to do first is just thread on the first crimp sleeve. Not particularly easy when you're holding it up for the camera, but there we go, that's the first crimp sleeve on. We're then just going to thread over the treble hook, and then we're going to loop that over and feed it back inside the crimp sleeve, so hopefully you can see that alright. And then we want to push that through so that it's just near the end of the crimp sleeve itself. You can see that there. And then we're just going to pull that a little tight so that we're just left with a little loop just there on the edge. Okay, so that's how that will hang. And then now some people do like to heat up the crimp before they do this, so they'll use a lighter to make it hot. Personally, I haven't found that it makes much difference in doing that. I've not had any problems at all in terms of strength when not doing it. So we just pinch that inside and give it a real good squeeze. It's important that you do squeeze that as hard as you possibly can. You've got to bear in mind that that is the only thing that's keeping that trace together, and potentially the only thing that's going to stop that trace coming off in a fish's mouth. Okay, so that's it. That's all there is to it. You feed it through, give it a real good pinch, I don't know if you can see just on the camera there, it's probably not going to focus on it, but you can see little grooves all the way along. Alright, so that's the first one done. Okay, so now we're just going to grab the second treble and we're going to feed that on over the other end of the wire trace. Let it slide down so that it's free running along the trace, as you can see. Now, this is essentially what allows you to customise your trace. If you know what hook bait you're going to be using, what size of bait it is, you can obviously set these hooks accordingly. If you know that you're going to be fishing with a really small hook bait, you might want to have them quite close together, because ideally you want your first hook near the head of your bait and the second hook around 1/2 to 3/4 of the way down your bait. That's going to give you the best chance of a hook up. Now for me, generally speaking, I'll fish an average size roach, so I'll probably want about 4 inches between the two hooks, 3 to 4 inches, okay? So all I'm going to do now is tie a knotless knot. So you hold the wire firm there, hold your treble so that it's in your fingers, and then we take the trace and we're going to go winding it round, working down the shank of the hook. And I'm going to give this maybe 6 or 7 turns, making sure that when I'm whipping that on, it's just going over each time. Okay, not sure if you can see that. Then you just need to hold that firm while you then get the other end of the wire and thread that through the eye. Okay, we're then, whilst still holding that wire firm, we're just going to pull that wire through, and that there gives us a knotless knot. Okay, so then we're going to grab the treble sleeve. Okay, so just slotted the treble sleeve over the end of the wire there, and again you'll see I'm just going to slide that down the wire. That's going to come to the treble that we've just tied on, and it just slides over, making all of that really nice and neat and tidy. So what you see there is essentially the finished part of the hook tying process. So you've got one of your hooks, the first treble, hangs loose and it can move around, which for me I feel is quite important. There are different ways that you can tie these hooks on, but I found that I like that best because it allows your bait to have a lot more movement, and when the pike gets in its mouth it allows that hook to move free and actually set in nicely. The second one is tied on with a knotless knot, essentially just up that trace, and that's what you would be hooking into the flank, the side of the fish. Alright, so just onto the other end then. So I'm just going to pinch this off because a couple of strands of the wire had come loose there, so I'm just nipping it off just so I've got a nice clean finish again. Alright, and then I'm going to slide over the piece of anti-tangle tubing. There we go, and that's through. The next piece that needs to go on is the second crimp, so we slide that on, and the final piece is the swivel. So that's just a standard size 8 barrel swivel. Slide it on. Okay, and we're going to go through the same process. So you loop that wire over, you feed it back inside the crimp tube, you pull the crimp tube so that it's reasonably tight but still got a little bit of movement in there, and we grab our crimp pliers, slot that in there, and pinch it nice and tight again so that's locked in place too. Alright, and then the final thing to do is just pull up that piece of anti-tangle tubing, and I like to get this and pull it up so that it's covering the first eye on that swivel. And there we have it. Okay, so that's the completed rig. So we've got the trebles just there, and then going down the line to the other end we've got the anti-tangle tubing. Now what I then do is I use a rig bin. These are really handy for keeping your rigs nice and tidy. You don't want them kicking about all over your box. As you can see, there's a couple that's already tied up on there. Some of them have got the red sleeves, some of them have got the black. And then I just start on there using the swivel. So I clip the swivel in and then literally, whoops, I just wind it around to get it nice and neat. I make sure that I don't pull this too tight as I'm winding it on, because what you don't want is you don't want there to be any bend in the wire when it comes to taking it off. So then you just secure that rig in place, and there we go. That's another rig done. I can probably tie those up within a minute or so each. And in terms of the parts to tie a rig up, you're probably looking at a total cost to tie your own of between £1 and £2, dependent on which hooks you choose to use, which wire trace you choose to use, and whether you're going to have any of these sleeves on them or not. They're not necessary, you don't actually need to use them. These rigs will work perfectly fine without any of those rubber tubes. I guess it's just a little bit of a habit that I've got into and using it. I do like to think that, you know, the bait's being presented well, and that wherever I've got a knot, it's appropriately covered up, and it's safe. I'll just show you the rig bin and how that works. So that comes in like a little plastic tub, screws on, keeps all your rigs nice and safe, but probably more importantly, it keeps you nice and safe, because the last thing is you want these hooks kicking about in your tackle bag. It really does hurt if you get one of those stuck in you. These are the rigs, the hooks, sorry, that I've used for the rig that I've just tied up today. So these are semi-barbed. They only have one barb on the 3 of the hooks, so just one out of the 3's got a barb on it, and that's the hook that you want to be using to actually fix your bait on. I've found that using either semi-barbed or barbless, it's as productive as it is using a barbed hook, but when it comes to unhooking, it's so much easier and so much faster, which makes it safer for you and safer for the fish as well. So that's something to bear in mind. It's not necessarily a good thing having 3 barbed hooks. Okay, so that's how we tie up a wire trace. I hope that has been useful. And now I'll just show you some of the basic tackle that I use to actually set up the different types of rigs as well. So one for ledgering and one for float fishing. So bear with me for 2 minutes. Alright, so this here is the basic ledger rig that I use for when I'm pike fishing. It really couldn't be any more simple than this. It's a free running rig, so you can see there the main line just flows freely through that large run rig. And the reason that you want a large run rig on it is just so that there's as little resistance as possible on that line. You want to have be able to detect as many bites as you possibly can, and sometimes the bites can be really sensitive. So having that free running for me is the best approach to take. Some people do fish fixed rigs, you know, it's each to their own, but I prefer to just use a free running rig, and for me it's also the safest type of rig as well. So just to talk you through in a little bit more detail about what these pieces of terminal tackle are that we're using here. This is just a 1.5 ounce to 2 ounce flat pear lead. You can get different types of leads, different shapes, different sizes, etc. Generally speaking, that's the type of thing that I would use if I was fishing on a river. It's a gripper lead, just helps to keep your fish a little bit more to the bottom. And if perhaps I was casting a little bit further and I wanted something a little bit more streamlined, I might use that type of bomb. Anyhow, that's the leads. I don't think it makes that much difference, to be honest, what type of lead you use, but what probably does make a difference is the size. Personally, I like to use something that's around 2 ounce, just so that I know that my bait is fixed, and then that any movement that I'm getting, it is as a consequence of a fish and a take, and not you know, the river flowing, etc., or the canal towing one way or the other. That allows it to kind of fix fairly tight to the deck. This then is a Fox run rig. which for me it's my favourite type. Really easy to use. I'll try and get that in focus. Will it pick it up? No, probably not. But you can see how easy it is to just unclip these. So that's the lead detached. So if you did need to change your lead for a bigger one, and then to clip it back on again, you just push it back in there, round it goes, one way and then the other, and it's back on. So there's a nice little piece of rubber there that's kind of covering that clip itself. Okay, so that then goes up to a large stopper bead, and the reason that I use a fairly large stopper bead is because I want the other end of the swivel to be completely covered up. So there it is running free at the moment. I'll just pull that tight so that you can see how that's then presented. And there you see, so that swivel is completely covered up in its entirety. So we've got the anti-tangle tubing below it, and that there. And that for me is quite important when you're fishing on the rivers or the canals. There is quite a lot of snags around, places for your rig to get caught up, and it's important to have those knots covered up. Last thing that you want to be doing is losing a fish when it's got a set of trebles in its mouth. So that is really all there is to it. So that's obviously the other end of the rig. So you can see it really is a very basic, very simple rig. So that's the trace that we tied up a little earlier. We've got a large stopper bead on there that just slides over the end, and then a free running lead. Alright, so that's the standard ledgering rig that I'll use, and I'll also show you a basic float rig just now. Okay, so I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to talk you through a standard float setup. Probably use this for about 90% of my dead bait float fishing. So at the top end I've got a couple of float stops with a rubber bead in the middle. That's essentially what the float can run up to and what stops it from going any further, and what I'll use to set the depth that I want to be fishing at. The float itself is a Codex dumpy slider. It's an 18-gram float, is this one, which is probably my average one that I would use. I do have some that are a little bit heavier and some that are a little bit lighter as well. So dependent on where I'm fishing, what the conditions are like, I might change that to something that's a little bit heavier or lighter. That float then is free to slide up and down your line. And down here we have a weight that essentially is a dropper that's going to ensure that we've got a tight line between whatever depth we're fishing at and our float. That is a 10-gram bullet weight that I've got on there, again with one of the float stops on either side. And the good thing about that is, you know, if it gets wedged or whatever, the float stop will allow it to move up and down the line should it need to. So it should be pretty much tangle free. And we then move on to just the standard wire trace that we showed you a little earlier. The two hooks on there and the rig tube, etc. at that end. So that's the setup. Now essentially what you would do, you would use this to determine what depth you want to fish at. Obviously the weight's going to pull your float down, and with that being a 10-gram weight and this being an 18-gram float, it'll sit probably around there. You could add a little bit of weight to it if you wanted it lower so that it was more sensitive for the bites, but about there is about right for me for the majority of the fishing that I do. The canal that I fish on does have quite a bit of tow, and the rivers that I fish on as well have got a little bit of flow. I don't tend to fish any particularly fast flowing rivers, so this type of float is okay. Obviously you use this to kind of, you'll move this up and down the line to determine exactly what depth you want to be fishing at. And for the majority of my fishing I'll start at about mid-depth. The canal where I regularly fish is quite deep. We've got about 12 foot of water on there, so I'll start at about 6 foot, and I'll sometimes work my way down and then sometimes even work my way up to come a little bit more shallow. This rig will work perfectly well for dead baits and also live baits as well. You can use it for both. You probably wouldn't want to add any extra weight to it if you were putting a live bait on, because the last thing that you want is your live bait pulling your float under the water. Alright, so I hope that's been useful. That is essentially the basic float setup that I use for the majority of my pike fishing. So just before we finish this this first part of the piking video, just wanted to show you a couple of little bits of tackle that I generally take with me. The first one is essential. This goes with me every time I go piking. I wouldn't go without it. It's a pair of Daiwa trigger grip pliers. These are fantastic bits of kit for unhooking the pike. Would highly recommend these. My personal opinion is that these are better than pliers for when it comes to unhooking your fish. You know, you can get deep into the fish and you can use that to grip it and manoeuvre it exactly how you would want to. So excellent bit of kit, and they're only about 10 quid, so really good investment to have. And the second one, most drug addicts might have one of these, but that's not what it's been used for here. We've got a syringe with a hypodermic needle on it, and a protective cover for obvious reasons. You do need to keep that needle covered up, but this is a bit of kit that I take with me when I go as well. I can either use this to inject the bait with some sort of additive, or equally just to spray it on the bait as well. It's really handy. Also, sometimes you might want to actually present your bait off the deck, and this needle is a great way of doing that. Really cost-effective way of using it to pop up your bait. Literally, you pierce it under the skin of the fish, inject a little bit of air into it, test it in the water to see whether it's allowing the bait to float, and you can use that to quite accurately get your bait to either pop up wholly or to have it kind of suspended in the water. So really cheap to buy. You can get these off eBay for a couple of quid for a set. And the Predator Plus, I think it's about 4 quid. The only thing I would say about this stuff is don't get it near your hands. It does take a while to come off, but I have found it to be quite useful. Not sure that it's had masses of difference to my catch rate, but definitely helps in terms of just giving you a little bit of confidence when you want to try something a little bit different during a session if you're not having much luck. So yeah, there we go. Alright, so that's it. That's the end of this this first part of the piking video. Like I say, I'm going to do a follow-up one which will talk you through in a little bit more detail some of the tackle that I use. So I'll show you the rods, the reels, the line, the alarms, the indicators, etc. Just so if you are thinking about taking up piking, I'll give you a little bit of an idea as to how I go about it and how you might want to approach things for yourself. Hope you find that that's been useful. Thanks for watching if you've made it through to the end. Cheers, and look forward to seeing you all on the banks soon. Cheers guys, tight lines.